She's clearly mentally unstable, my brother David announced to the estate attorney, sliding a folder across the conference table with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no. We've documented erratic behavior, social isolation, and concerning decision-making patterns. We need to establish a conservatorship immediately, for her protection. My sister Margot nodded vigorously. It's for her own good. Mother would have wanted us to take care of her. But why was the estate attorney looking at me with an expression that hovered somewhere between disbelief and amusement, and why did his next words make my siblings freeze mid-performance? Dr. Harrison, he said, turning to me with exaggerated politeness. Would you like to present your credentials before we proceed? I believe you literally wrote the state's competency evaluation guidelines. David's folder slipped from his fingers. Doctor, he repeated. What do you mean, doctor? I folded my hands on the table, allowing myself a small smile. I'm a board-certified psychiatrist, David. I've been practicing for 15 years. I specialize in forensic psychiatry, which means I evaluate mental competency for legal proceedings. I paused. I've testified as an expert witness in over 200 cases. The competency standards you'd need to use against me? I helped write them. The color drained from both their faces. Now then, I continued pleasantly, shall we discuss why you really want to take control of my inheritance? My mother, Eleanor Harrison, died 3 months ago. She was 87 years old, sharp as a tack until the very end, and absolutely certain about how she wanted her estate divided. I knew this because she'd told me, explicitly, during our weekly phone calls for the last decade. Your brother and sister have had everything handed to them their entire lives, she'd said, 6 months before she passed. I've given them money for houses, cars, businesses that failed, divorces, more businesses that failed. I'm done. What's left goes to you, Naomi. You're the only one who never asked for anything. Mom, you don't have to. I want to. You became a doctor without any help from us. You built a career helping people. You've never once made me feel like an ATM. She'd laughed, that dry chuckle I'd miss forever. Let David and Margot fight over my costume jewelry. The rest is yours. The rest turned out to be substantial. My mother had been quietly brilliant with money her entire life. While my father worked as a mid-level corporate manager, she'd invested her modest inheritance from her own parents into an increasingly diverse portfolio. Stocks, bonds, real estate, index funds. By the time she died, her estate was worth $12.8 million. I was named sole beneficiary of everything except 2 items. Her wedding ring went to Margot, her father's watch to David. Everything else, the investments, the property, the accounts, came to me. My siblings were not pleased. I'd learned to be invisible in my family long before I became a psychiatrist. David, the eldest, was the golden child, handsome, charming, perpetually confident despite never actually achieving anything that justified his self-regard. He'd started 4 businesses with money from our parents, run all 4 into the ground, and somehow convinced everyone that his failures were just bad luck rather than poor judgment. Margot, 3 years older than me, was the beautiful one. She'd coasted on her looks through 2 marriages, both ending when her husbands realized that prettiness didn't compensate for cruelty. She'd received substantial settlements from both divorces and burned through the money within years. And then there was me. The quiet one. The reader. The girl who'd rather study than socialize, who'd worked 3 jobs to put herself through medical school because she'd rather have debt than obligation. My family had always found me strange. Too serious, Mom used to say before she understood me better. Too intense, Dad would add. They couldn't comprehend a person who didn't want to be the center of attention, who preferred books to parties, who found more meaning in helping people process trauma than in accumulating social connections. So they'd stopped paying attention to me. And in their inattention, I'd built a life they knew nothing about. By the time I was 45, I was the director of forensic psychiatry at a major teaching hospital. I'd published 2 textbooks on competency evaluation that were used in law schools across the country. I'd testified in cases that made national headlines, consulted for federal agencies, and developed the guidelines that my state used to determine mental fitness. My siblings had no idea. They thought I was some kind of therapist, their dismissive phrase for my career. They'd never attended my graduation, never read my publications, never once asked about my work beyond the most superficial questions. Their ignorance was about to cost them dearly. The conservatorship attempt began 2 weeks after the will reading. I'd been expecting something. David and Margot had been apoplectic when they learned about the inheritance. But I'd assumed they'd try to contest the will directly, claiming Mom had been mentally compromised or unduly influenced. Instead, they went after me. The first sign was a letter from an attorney I'd never heard of, requesting a family meeting to discuss concerns about Naomi Harrison's welfare. The language was careful, designed to sound caring rather than predatory, but I recognized the setup immediately. They were going to try to have me declared incompetent. The strategy made a certain twisted sense. If they could establish that I was mentally unfit to manage my own affairs, they could petition for conservatorship, take control of my inheritance, and essentially steal everything Mom had left me, all while claiming they were protecting me. It was a scheme I'd seen before, professionally. Elder abuse cases often involved similar dynamics, greedy relatives manufacturing evidence of incompetence to gain control of assets. The tactics were depressingly predictable. What my siblings didn't realize was that I'd spent my career identifying exactly these tactics, testifying against exactly these schemes, and writing the standards that courts use to evaluate exactly these claims. They'd brought a butter knife to a sword fight. The meeting was held at the offices of my mother's estate attorney, Gerald Kimball. Gerald was an old friend of the family who had known us all since childhood. More importantly, he knew exactly who I was and what I did. When I'd called to warn him about what was coming, he'd sounded almost delighted. "They have no idea, do they?" he'd asked. "None whatsoever. This should be interesting." David and Margot arrived with their attorney, a slick personal injury lawyer named Preston who had clearly been fed a very incomplete picture of the situation. They dressed for the occasion, David in his best suit, Margot in her most concerned expression. I'd worn my hospital ID badge, just for fun. The meeting began with David's presentation. He'd prepared a folder of evidence, a collection of the most absurd allegations I'd ever seen assembled. "Naomi has become increasingly isolated," he began, reading from notes. "She rarely attends family gatherings. She hasn't been in a relationship in years. She lives alone with minimal social connections." "I'm a forensic psychiatrist who works 60 hours a week," I interjected mildly. "I see patients, teach medical students, consult on legal cases, and testify in court. My social time is limited." "She exhibits signs of paranoid thinking," David continued, ignoring me. "She's accused family members of having ulterior motives without evidence. You're literally trying to have me declared incompetent to steal my inheritance. That's not paranoia. That's accurate perception. She's made concerning financial decisions. Mother's will clearly reflects Naomi's undue influence over an elderly woman." "Objection," Gerald interrupted. "That's a claim about Eleanor's competency, not Naomi's. And Eleanor was evaluated by 2 independent physicians in the months before her death, both of whom certified her as mentally sound." Preston, the siblings' attorney, finally spoke up. "We're not here to contest the will at this time. We're here to express concern that Ms. Harrison may not be capable of managing an estate of this size." Gerald leaned back in his chair. "And what evidence do you have of incapacity?" David produced more papers. "We've documented instances of social withdrawal, emotional flatness, difficulty maintaining relationships, unusual lifestyle choices." "Those aren't criteria for incompetency," I said. "I should know. I wrote the criteria." Preston looked at me sharply. "Excuse me?" Gerald smiled. "Mr. Preston, I don't believe you've been fully briefed on Dr. Harrison's credentials. Perhaps she should present them herself." I pulled out my own folder, the one I'd prepared for this exact moment. "I'm Dr. Naomi Harrison, board-certified in psychiatry with a subspecialty in forensic psychiatry. I've been practicing for 15 years. I'm currently the director of forensic psychiatry at St. Margaret's Hospital, where I train residents and medical students in competency evaluation." I handed copies of my curriculum vitae to everyone at the table. "I've testified as an expert witness in over 200 legal proceedings involving mental competency. I've been qualified as an expert in state and federal courts across 12 jurisdictions. I've published 2 textbooks on forensic psychiatric evaluation that are used in law schools and medical schools nationwide." I paused, watching Preston's face go pale as he flipped through my CV. "Most relevantly, I served on the state commission that developed our current competency evaluation guidelines. The standards that would be used to assess my mental fitness? I helped write them. I quite literally know them better than any evaluator who might be appointed." The silence was exquisite. "Furthermore," I continued, "I've spent my career identifying exactly the kind of scheme you're attempting right now. I've testified against family members who manufactured evidence of incapacity to gain control of assets. I know every tactic, every manipulation, every false claim. You're not breaking new ground here. You're just doing it badly." David had gone from confident to desperate. "This is exactly what we're talking about. This grandiosity, this paranoid belief that we're conspiring against her. Is it paranoid if it's true?" Gerald asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, you've just attempted to have a renowned psychiatrist declared incompetent using evidence that would pass a first-year law student's scrutiny." Preston closed his folder. "I think we need to adjourn." "No," I said. "I don't think we do. I think we need to be very clear about what happens next." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. David, Margot, I'm going to explain your situation to you in simple terms. You've just attempted to defraud me of my inheritance by pursuing a conservatorship under false pretenses. That's not a civil matter. That's a criminal one. We were expressing legitimate concern, Margot started. You were manufacturing evidence to support a fraudulent claim. I have copies of the text messages you exchanged planning this meeting. I pulled out my phone and read aloud, if we can get her declared incompetent, we split the money. Play up the weird loner angle. Make her sound crazy. I looked at my sister. Sound familiar? Margot's face went white. How did you? Cousin Lisa forwarded them to me. She was apparently on a group chat you forgot about. I set the phone down. I also have records of you contacting 3 different psychiatrists trying to find one who would evaluate me without my knowledge or consent, all of whom declined and reported the contact to their professional boards. David's attorney was gathering his papers with the speed of a man desperate to disassociate himself from his clients. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to drop this conservatorship nonsense immediately. You're going to accept the inheritance mom left you, her ring and her watch, and you're going to be grateful for it. And you're going to leave me alone. And if we don't? David asked, some of his belligerence returning. Then I file criminal fraud charges, submit my documentation to the state bar for review of your attorney's conduct, and pursue a civil suit for intentional infliction of emotional distress. I smiled. I will also make sure that every detail of your attempted scheme becomes part of the public record. Every text message. Every contact with psychiatrists. Every piece of evidence showing that you tried to have your sister declared mentally incompetent to steal her inheritance, you wouldn't. I've spent 15 years in courtrooms, David. I know exactly how to build a case, present evidence, and destroy an opposing argument. Do you really want to test me? The silence stretched. Finally, Preston spoke. I'm withdrawing from this matter. I was clearly not provided with complete information about the circumstances. He stood up, not looking at David or Margot. I'd advise my former clients to take Dr. Harrison's offer. It's more generous than they deserve. He left without another word. Gerald excused himself shortly after, leaving me alone with my siblings. For a long moment, none of us spoke. David stared at the table. Margot picked at her manicure. I waited. How? David finally asked. How did we not know? You're our sister. We've known you your whole life. Have you? When was the last time you asked me about my work? My life? Anything beyond surface pleasantries? He didn't answer. You decided who I was when we were children. The quiet one. The weird one. The one who didn't matter. And you never updated that assessment, even when I graduated medical school, even when I became a department director, even when I published textbooks that are used to train the lawyers you just tried to hire against me. We didn't know. You didn't want to know. You were too busy being the golden children, expecting everything to be handed to you, to notice that your little sister was actually accomplishing something. Margot looked up, tears in her eyes. Mom never told us you were successful. She always acted like you were struggling. Mom knew I preferred privacy. She respected that. And maybe, I paused, considering. Maybe she also knew that if you realized how well I was doing, you'd have tried to take advantage of it sooner. That's not fair. You just tried to have me declared mentally incompetent to steal my inheritance. How is that fair? Neither of them had an answer. I gathered my things. We're done here. Accept the items Mom left you. Move on with your lives. And don't contact me again unless it's to apologize, a real apology, not a performance designed to get something from me. Naomi, wait, Margot reached out. Dr. Harrison, I corrected. You lost the right to familiarity when you tried to have me locked in a conservatorship. I walked out without looking back. The inheritance processed 6 weeks later, without further challenge. I used some of the money to establish a scholarship fund in my mother's name, supporting first-generation medical students who couldn't afford the path I'd struggled through. I donated to the literacy nonprofit my hospital partnered with. I invested the rest, following the same careful strategies my mother had used to build her wealth. David called once, about a month after the meeting. I need a loan, he said, without preamble. My business is struggling and I hung up. Margot sent a letter, handwritten, which I suspected she thought would be meaningful. It was full of excuses disguised as explanations, non-apologies framed as reconciliation attempts. I read it once and threw it away. My colleague, Dr. Patricia Santos, asked me about it during lunch one day. You ever going to forgive them? I considered the question. Forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about whether carrying the resentment hurts me more than releasing it. And does it? Not really. I've spent my career studying how families dysfunction, how people manipulate, how greed corrupts relationships. What my siblings did wasn't surprising. It was predictable. And I was prepared for it. That sounds lonely. Maybe. I shrugged, but I'd rather be lonely and clear-eyed than surrounded by people who see me as a resource to exploit. Patricia nodded slowly. You know what's ironic? They tried to prove you were mentally incompetent. But you're probably the most competent person I know. That is ironic. And satisfying. Mostly satisfying. Last month, I was invited to present at a national conference on elder abuse and estate fraud. My talk was titled, When Family Becomes Predator, Identifying and Preventing Competency Fraud. I discussed the tactics that abusers use, the warning signs that attorneys and physicians should watch for, the legal standards that protect vulnerable individuals. I didn't mention my personal experience directly. I didn't need to. But as I spoke about family members who manufactured evidence of incapacity, who exploited their relatives' trust, who used the legal system as a weapon against their own blood, I thought about David and Margot sitting in that conference room, so confident in their scheme, so completely unprepared for reality. They'd tried to have me declared incompetent. They'd failed to do basic research on their target. They'd hired an attorney without telling him who I was. They'd put their conspiracy in writing on a group chat that included someone loyal to me. In trying to prove I was mentally unfit, they demonstrated their own stunning lack of judgment. There was a certain poetic justice in that. After my presentation, a young attorney approached me. Dr. Harrison, I'm handling a case right now that sounds similar to what you described. A family trying to establish conservatorship over an elderly woman to control her assets. Do you have any advice? Document everything, I said. Get independent evaluations from qualified professionals. Look at the accuser's financial situations, often they're motivated by debt or failed businesses. And remember that the burden of proof is on them. They have to demonstrate incapacity, not just assert it. Thank you. This is really helpful. That's why I do this work. There are too many predators who think they can exploit the system. Someone has to stop them. She thanked me again and walked away. I gathered my materials, thinking about my mother, about her faith in me, about the wealth she'd built and the wisdom she'd shown and how she'd distributed it. She'd known, I realized. She'd known exactly what David and Margot would try, and she'd trusted me to handle it. And I had. They called me incompetent because they thought I was invisible. They built their case on assumptions they'd never tested, schemes they'd never researched, and tactics I'd spent my career dismantling. They didn't know I was a psychiatrist. They didn't know I wrote the rules. They didn't know anything about me, because they'd never cared enough to learn. That was their mistake. The inheritance is mine now, not because I needed it, but because Mom wanted me to have it. She saw me clearly when no one else did. And in the end, clarity was all that mattered.